onto your butt.
Da-da-da. Oh, hello. Welcome to episode 146 of the Civil War Breakfast Club podcast. I'm Darren. She's Mary. And Mary, I don't know if you know this, but we're going to be recording this episode live today.
We're here right now.
Yes, from GettysGear on Baltimore Street in Gettysburg, in front of a live studio audience. So hi, everybody. Thanks for coming out on this sunny Saturday morning. And, of course, thank you all. It's going to be a great weekend here at GettysGear, full of fantastic presentations, live music, trivia, and, shall I say, bourbon later on today. So it should be a good time. We have the honor of kicking off this shindig by talking about an extremely important battle that took place 160 years ago this week, and that is the Battle of Bentonville, the largest and costliest battle ever fought in the state of North Carolina. So to set this up, we're going to have to talk about what was going on at the time, right?
Yeah, and what's going on at the time is General Sherman is doing his Carolinas campaign, which he had started in February, and he is making his way through the Carolinas. And he actually saw the Carolinas campaign as being more important than his March to the Sea. That's what he says about it in his memoirs. He always saw the March to the Sea as just kind of shifting his base of operations from Atlanta to Savannah. He saw the Carolinas as being more important because he knew at that point the gloves were going to be off with his men. They were going into where secession had started, and he felt that he wouldn't be able to keep them reined in as much as he had going through Georgia.
Right, and so for the Confederates, their only hope was really to slow Sherman down, to avoid this merger of the armies. As long as he is able to basically, he wants to, for the most part, allow Lee's army to be joined by the Army of the South, which is 20,000 men commanded by Joseph E. Johnston, who is now operating in North Carolina. Sherman had about 60,000 guys, and they were tired, but they could smell blood. They knew the end was near. Johnston's army was a broken mess. Think of the Buffalo Bills in the playoffs. That's how bad of a mess they were, right? And did you ever see the movie Planes, Trains, and Automobiles when John Candy and Steve Martin are driving that crappy car and there's no windows and the doors aren't there and they get pulled over and he tells the cops, hey, at least the radio still works, right? That's Johnston's army. It's 20,000 soldiers who had just about had it. 4,500 were broken veterans of John Bell Hood's disastrous Franklin-Nashville campaign. And the remaining 15,000 were taped together with Bondo from the Department of North Carolina, commanded by Braxton Bragg, the Department of South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida, commanded by William Hardee, and 2 cavalry corps led by Wade Hampton and Joseph Wheeler. And to give you an idea of this army, the largest brigade in Johnston's army was the North Carolina Junior Reserves. This is 1,200 17-year-old boys, commanded by a guy named Colonel John F. Nethercutt. And they were supposed to be the home guard. They were supposed to just basically be the militia, but because of what was going on, they got called into service. President Jefferson Davis, he called this a robbing of the cradle of the Confederacy.
And the other thing, too, to remember about the Confederate Army at this time is the one Army of Tennessee, which had been in Hood's Franklin campaign. As Darren said, they are a shell of what they once were. These men, some of them are being fed in to new regiments, and they're having to pack up their flags that they have always carried with them. So you can imagine the morale of the army is not good at this time either.
Yeah, and after the fall of Fort Fisher in Wilmington on February 22nd, 1865, the city was under command of old friend General John Schofield, Mary. We talked about the Franklin fame, right? Schofield's ordered by Sherman to leave Wilmington with his 30,000 men and meet him in the town of Goldsboro, North Carolina, where when they combined both wings of Sherman's army with Schofield's, it'll be 90,000 men, a giant monster of an army. And they would use this merged army to finish off Johnston and then proceed to Virginia to go ahead and meet Grant and hopefully end the war. But Johnston knew Sherman's plan, and he did, and he knew that any chance he had to beat Sherman was really to delay him, is what he really wants to do, was to hit Sherman's army before they can meet up with Schofield. So basically what you have is you have 30,000 men per wing and an additional 30,000 in Goldsboro. He knows Sherman's separated. He's got 20,000 men. So he's thinking, well, if I can hit one of the wings, it's 20,000 versus 30. Still don't like the numbers, but it's better than 90, right? So any chance he had was to basically hit them before they could get together. And he knew they were divided, and he knew that they were going to be proceeding to a place called Cox's Bridge, on a place called the Nayuse River, which is a short distance east of a village called Bentonville, North Carolina. Johnston knew that the wings would have to meet at Cox's Bridge and then cross the Nayuse to get to Goldsboro. So he knew that if he put part of his army or all of it there, he had a shot to delay them. And that's what his whole point was. Here, the roads were small. Just imagine it's like a little country road. We're not talking about Baltimore Street here. This is like a small little, like you're walking on the aisle of a movie theater. That's how small these roads are.
I got to say it at this point, though, this is something that Howard does talk about in his memoirs.
There's the first mention.
No, he mentions that the roads were not good going into Bentonville at all.
It's been tough, angels following him. He had a big posse, But the roads were small, so Johnston was going to attack Sherman's force as they approached that Cox's Bridge, those two separate wings. Cavalry Commander Wade Hampton, he figures this is the place to do it. It's kind of going to create a bottleneck. So if those Sherman's wings joined, they crossed the Cox's Bridge and got to Goldsboro to meet Schofield, that's game over, done deal. So everything possible. March 15th, 1865, Joseph Johnston has his headquarters in the town of Smithfield, North Carolina, 17 miles north of Bentonville, on modern-day Route 701, and home to the tremendous Cracker Barrel restaurant, which I can attest to, right?
They have amazing grits there. I had grits last weekend.
I didn't have any grits. Anyway, but Johnston's headquarters is also about 20 miles west of Goldsboro. So Hampton, again, his cavalry finds a location to launch the surprise attack on Sherman, because he knew he had to cross this area on the way again to Cox's Bridge. Hampton places men, and I'm going to quote here, on the eastern edge of an old plantation lying principally on the north side of the Goldsboro Road and surrounded east, south, and north by a dense thicket of oak trees. If you've been to Bentonville, you know about the trees. It's legit. The name of the plantation was the Willis Cole Plantation, which is about 2 miles south of the village of Bentonville. Now, Willis Cole, the owner, was an illiterate farmer who famously avoided being drafted in the rebel army because he was friends with a congressman named William A. Smith, who appointed him to be his magistrate, thus avoiding the draft. Hilarity ensued, though, when Cole could not sign his own name on the magistrate forms because he couldn't read. Must have been an Ohio State graduate. Oh, I know. That was a cheap one. But the initial target of Johnston's attack would be Sherman's left wing, led by Henry Slocum's Army of Georgia, who was first to appear on the Goldsboro Road.
And he thinks he's only encountering Confederate cavalry at this point. And he quickly realizes that that is not the case.
He certainly does. March 18th, 1865, is the only rebel force at the Cole Plantation is cavalry under George D. Debrell from Sparta, Tennessee, who was a division commander under Wheeler and the only force between Johnston's headquarters and Slocum's approaching army. Think Buford here. That's kind of what he was, right? Debrell had his men dismount, and they built defenses near the plantation and placed 2 batteries on the north side of the Goldsboro Road. A horseman in Debrell's 4th Tennessee said, "I hope old Hampton ain't bluffing, because if he is, Sherman will call him on it." Because they knew it was coming. Hampton knew he could not hold if Slocum attacked, but he had to risk it because that Federal advance to Goldsboro while Johnston's infantry was making that 17-mile trip from Smithfield. So they're kind of holding the line while the Confederate infantry is slowly coming. Debrell's cavalry is going to first meet the Feds when Major John Holmes of the 52nd Ohio, and commander of the foraging department, and his 90 men rode up the Goldsboro Road at dusk on the 18th. Now, Holmes was going to drive Debrell's men back to the woodlot when suddenly a sheet of rebel musketry from the woods surprised them and forced them back. They did not expect anything of that nature. Holmes knew it was infantry, but when he reported back to his camp to his boss, Brigadier General Benjamin Fearing, he basically laughed him off. No, that's just cavalry. It is. In Morgan, his boss, James Morgan, said, "I expect to be in Goldsboro by dusk tomorrow. They did not expect or respect, rather, any Confederate force in their front. They were just going to blow right through them. But again, Holmes, he stuck to his guns. He was convinced that that rebel force in front of him was more than cavalry.
Sounds like Appler at Shiloh.
Or it sounds like Heath here for the Confederates, actually. Same thing. He's trying to tell his bosses, one thing, and he knows it, but no one wants to listen. Everybody has a boss like that, probably. I think Cat was saying something like that earlier, as a matter of fact. But basically, Morgan, basically, the boss, finally dismissed him and said, listen, I don't care what you say. This is the deal. And Holmes was clearly pissed off at this. And he sighed, and his quote, he said, well, we will see, won't we? And he turned and stormed off. Like someone else I know, as a matter of fact. Such attitude, right? But the morning of the 19th came, and Sherman was riding with his right wing, commanded by St. Oliver Otis Howard, and they were about a day's march south of Slocum's wing. So just imagine, you've got one wing that's approaching, and the second one is further away. They're split up, but that's what Sherman, the big man, is with Howard. The 1st Infantry Corps to march towards the coal plantation will be under the 14th Corps, under Jefferson C. Davis. But again, it didn't take long before Holmes' prediction came true. They realized it. General Morgan, he told Davis, again, the only rebel cavalry under Debrell is in your front. That's it. And you can expect to meet Sherman at Cox's Bridge the next day. So again, even at this point, no one thinks that it's infantry. They think it's all cavalry. In the Federal lead was the 1st Division of Davis's 14th Corps under William P. Carlin from Illinois. Carlin begins to advance on Debrell's cavalry, who also laughed at the concept of rebel infantry in his front and figured they're going to have an easy time dealing with this rebel force, this cavalry force. Carlin yells to Holmes, get your damn bummers out of the way and I'll drive these rebs out with a skirmish line. I kind of appreciate the arrogance. You kind of do a little bit, right? But what Carlin didn't know is he was about to walk right into a rebel trap. Joseph E. Johnston, what had he done? He marched all 20,000 of his infantry to Bentonville late the previous evening, and they were right in his front, and Slocum didn't know it. He was only expecting to fight dismounted cavalry. Soon he found out he was tangled with the whole rebel army. It's kind of what he was, right? His men marched through an open field, and after chasing Debrell into the woods, when they reached that wood line again, bang, 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 a huge volley of musketry and artillery right into their faces. Robert Hoke's division from the Department of North Carolina, they were there. They blocked that Goldsboro Road, and those kids, that junior reserves, were deployed alongside the Army of Tennessee troops. These are John Bell Hood's former guys, that broken 4,500-man army from Tennessee, who was now under Alex P. Stewart. Hardee's men from the Department of South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida were then deployed at a 90-degree angle next to Stewart, with both flanks protected by those thick woods. So they got a good position, the Confederates do. Brigadier General Daniel H. Reynolds and Edward Walthall's division of the Army of Tennessee had the distinction of being the first officer casualty on either side when he was hit by an artillery shell while riding on his horse. Old Bob was the name of the horse. He quoted, "A shell entered my horse's breast and came out under my left knee, breaking it just below the knee. It then killed a large horse standing next to mine." So what does that say? You got artillery now, because you're starting to get that real action going back and forth. Carlin, Mary, got his dander up, right? And sent in all 3 of his brigades under Harrison Hobart, George Buell, and Davis Miles. But again, they got stopped cold by this rebel infantry that's all around the coal plantation. And these Federals finally realized that this was going to be the hardest fight they'd seen since the Atlanta campaign.
Yeah, and Slocum's got no idea how many men are in his front, and it's around this time that he's going to send a message back to Sherman saying that he needs help.
He does. Now you just imagine that situation. You're marching, you think it's going to be an easy day, and then something's up and you don't know what the deal is. A legit WTF moment, if you really think about it. And so what he does is he decides before that, though, he's going to send Carlin on a probing mission, okay? So just to see how many people we're dealing with here. So as his men kind of probed the wings, they got to within 40 yards of the 42nd Georgia under Major L.P. Thomas, who were hidden in the tree line. And all of a sudden, again, they walked into a firefight right in their faces. Carlin's line fell apart, and huge gaps began to appear in the Union line. George Buell's small brigade, he probably had around 600, 700 people. He lost 225 men in 10 minutes. A third of his regiment gone. And he didn't even see it coming. That's how this was. They said the fire was so hot that the Union dead's bodies were smoking and their muskets were still smoking as they lied on the ground. That's this hand-to-hand combat. His line disappeared faster than a Labatt's blue in your hands on a summer day, Mary. Just gone, right? And somehow the thing about it is even Slocum, it's amazing to think this. Slocum at this point still thinks the Rebs are small in front of him. This is when he gets his report from Henry Litchfield around 1:30 in the afternoon. And the quote says, "Well, General, I have found something more than Debrell's cavalry. I find Confederate infantry entrenched along our whole front, and enough of them to give us all the amusement we could want for the rest of the day." I mean, you can sense the pucker effect at that very moment in Slocum, right? I mean, just imagine. I mean, you find yourself basically surrounded. So this is when Slocum's going to write his letter to Sherman.
Yeah.
And say there's something strange afoot at the Circle K here.
Yeah.
Right?
He needs reinforcements.
He needs reinforcements ASAP is what he needs, right? So what he's going to do, he's going to leave his two of his 14 Corps divisions up front, those of Carlin and James Morgan. Solid Bostonian, James Morgan, by the way.
And apparently a Red Sox fan.
Would have been a Red Sox fan, no question. But Slocum is hoping that he could stop this rebel counterattack. But then what he's going to do, he's going to put a pair of 20th Corps divisions under Alpheus Williams back about a mile back at a place called the Morris Farm. So what he's doing is, in case the 14th Corps breaks, those two divisions with Carlin and Morgan, he puts another two behind them about a mile back, the 20th Corps. So if they're going to break through, I've got another line here. Because at this point, he's holding the line. He's standing in the rain holding his diaper, waiting for Sherman to get the rest of his men up here, because he doesn't know what he's dealing with. At 3 p.m. on March 19th, Johnson's army does strike, and he's going to charge those 14th Corps men at the coal farm. And they moved across the field, they said, in perfect order. Colonel Charles Broadfoot, he was a commander of the 1st North Carolina Junior Reserves, and just 21 years old, this kid is. He said it looked like a picture, just marching across the field, right? Now, coming at these Federals, on their left were divisions of William Bates, William Tolliver, D.H. Hill, and William Loring, who may or may not have had a beard. We don't know, right? But to their right were the divisions of Robert Hoke and Lafayette McLaws. So some of these names for the Gettysburg folks get familiar, right? The men of the 14th Corps were outflanked on both sides, and they ran like hell until they got to a farmhouse owned by John and Amy Harper, which is 2 miles southwest, which was quickly turned into a field hospital. If you go to Bentonville, you'll see the farm. It's one of the most famous buildings there. And the house still stands. You go there, you can see the blood stains on the floor from the hospital. And Jefferson C. Davis and Alpheus Williams told Slocum what they saw, and they said they could see Rebs as far as the eye could see. They were rapidly approaching. They said it was like standing on a beach watching the waves come in. That's how many of these Confederates coming in their faces. So Carlin's division, they had retreated to the rear, and only James Morgan's division was left to try to slow that Confederate roll through the coal plantation. Now, if you're a Federal and you need help, here comes Braxton Bragg to the rescue, okay? Bragg was ordered to attack with the rest of the Department of North Carolina at 2:45 sharp, but inexplicably, he did not move until 4. Maybe he was confused by the orders. Maybe he was too busy thinking about the 17 different flavors of rice-a-roni. Who knows? But he was delayed, and that delay saved Morgan because it gave them time to dig in and build defenses using bayonets, cut canteens, and their bare hands. Right? Jeff C. Davis, he brought up his 3rd Brigade under Benjamin Fearing to protect Morgan's other 2 that are up front and have them deploy on the right flank. Now, when Fearing's men, when they left, Davis told a staffer that Fearing's men were marching straight into hell at this point. I mean, this was an existential moment for this left wing because they thought they're going to get wiped out, and that was Johnson's plan. Fearing himself lost his thumb with the mini ball, and he got shot and fell back. But what does he do? He supports Morgan just long enough to hold the Rebs off. At this point, this battle is a hammer versus the nail smackdown for the Confederates. But the Confederates were losing men pretty quickly as well. This was a rock fight. Think of like a really good hockey fight. 2 guys going at each other, and it's relentless. That's what this Battle of Bentonville was at this moment. Morgan's men began to run low on ammo, and they decided they're going to try one last-ditch counterattack. And this is a cool story. Corporal George Cluse of Company I of the 14th Michigan, again, he was just 23 years old at the time of the battle. During the counterattack, he spotted the flag of a 40th North Carolina heavy artillery and decided he wanted it. Got to get that flag. So he has no ammo left. So he runs and he tackles the Confederate flag bearer. And since they were both out of ammo, they said, well, let's just fight for it. Drop the gloves and let's go. Winner gets the flag. Clute apparently was, he seemed to get the jump on him. He dragged the rebel and the flag for 100 feet before the Confederate let the flag go. On August 26, 1898, George Clute received the Medal of Honor for this, for getting the flag. So Slocum now, he just sent in the 3rd Brigade from the 20th Corps under William Cogswell after Morgan reported getting firing from his rear. So now he's got Confederates all around him, and this is what he is. But Morgan's reinforced now. And he's going to strike again on their fronts, and now the battle's going to begin to turn. They're going to begin to outflank the Rebs at the coal plantation. And before long, guess what happens? The Rebs are surrounded. So it's going back and forth. A rebel said there were so many Union troops in the trees that the trees looked blue. That's how many there were all of a sudden. The foliage is thick. And Mary, who was hiding in a bush last weekend around this time, can attest to that, I think.
Did.
Yeah, no question.
It is something.
But many of the rebels were captured, and they were told by their federal captors that, hey, not for nothing, but this is the first time our lines have ever been broken. Lieutenant R.J. Heath of the 34th Illinois, the Rock River Rifles, he said, we saw nothing in 4 years of Army life compared to that with the 19th of March. Again, Bentonville has a reputation of kind of being a big battle, but you don't realize how hot it actually was, right? The battle then is going to slide south to that Morris farm, where, if you remember, William's 20th Corps is now set up, and they're going to get hit under fire by William Tolliver from Hardee's Corps. So again, that back and forth. Williams and Tolliver had been fighting each other going all the way back to the Valley in 1862. So they kind of known combatants. At the Morris farm today, there's a marker there listing this as the high water mark of the Confederacy of Bentonville. If you go and check it out. Tolliver's men came out with that rebel yell, and as they left the woods, they went into a big clearing. They came screaming across. You can just imagine, right? Chaplain L.W. Earl of the 21st Michigan, he said of their yell, such fiendish yells never saluted my ears before. So Tolliver's men are going to run straight into a volley of Union artillery, and the shrapnel ripped them apart as they came. They said the men said the case shot burned into the ground, which if you've been there is basically sand with grass on it. And they talked about the churned up sand from this Union artillery caused a sandstorm. That is, the Rebs, when running across the field, they had to cover their eyes because the sand was blinding them as they charged. If you've been there, you know what I'm talking about.
I don't know how they ran across the field with that, because that was tough to walk on.
Just imagine running on a beach being fired upon. And you don't think about it. It's not that close to the ocean. But Tolliver's men got within 30 yards of the Union line before the infantry and artillery fire drove them back. Their assault of the Morris farm was brutal. And a writer from the New York Herald, his name is E.D. Westfall, he describes it by writing, quote, the rebels massed for a final effort emerged from the woods just as the sun went down. They came into Mr. Morris's open field, with that yell, marched steadily on the Union line. They were received with the heaviest musketry that the feds could give them, but they stood it. They bravely came on before retiring hastily and in confusion. Westphal doesn't mention the artillery, though, but that 20th Corps fired on them with 16 guns from angles surrounding the field with case and canister. Williams wrote later, they came within 12 paces, that's like here to there, of the 20th Corps artillery and were terribly punished with dead officers and men, especially when the canister swept them off from their left front.
That sounds about how close you were to them last weekend.
Pretty much was. They've taken canister at 12 paces, and they're still coming. Finally, Johnson's men fall back to their original positions as night fell, in which the assault on Morris Farm, which only happened really because Morgan held off the Rebs just long enough earlier to get those Williams men to deploy in the 20th Corps. So by the day's end, the Union line on the Morris line is held. I know what you're thinking, Mary. What's Howard doing at this point? Because I know you are.
He's on the right wing at their headquarters at a place called Falling Creek Church, about 10 miles southeast of Bentonville, near the town of Grantham, North Carolina. And Howard does write in his memoirs that they are close enough. He's been hearing the artillery, and he is obviously wondering what is going on at this point.
Now, they could hear the distant thud of the artillery, and Sherman went to sleep that night wondering what was going on, because he wasn't expecting this. And this is a good story here. Later that night, a courier arrived for Sherman with the news of the fighting on the 19th. Sherman was asleep in his tent, and when he arrived, he came running out once he realized news had come. Lieutenant Colonel William Strong, one of Howard's staff officers, described the moment when the courier arrived. I want you to imagine this in your head, okay? Just because you'll never forget it. The commander-in-chief, Sherman, would have made a good subject for Punch or Vanity Fair. Every officer present was nearly bursting with laughter at Sherman's ludicrous appearance. Being, of course, anxious to hear the news of Slocum's fight, he rushed out to the campfire without stopping to put on his clothes. He stood with his arms behind his back, wearing nothing but a red flannel undershirt. Now, I know for many of those officers present, their self would never rise again after seeing that, I imagine. But you can imagine instant PTSD. And that's a story that's quoted. Slocum's message explained the day's effort, but also begged for reinforcements, which Sherman assured him would be on the way immediately. Sherman ordered Howard's right wing to march at dawn on the 20th to Bentonville, with the 15th Corps under Black Jack Logan in the lead. And what the Confederates do here is they kind of anticipate this a little bit. So they put a skirmish line up in between. So as Logan's men begin to get towards Bentonville, they've got to fight all along the way to slow them down. This whole thing was to slow them down. There was no real pretense they'd win this battle on the Confederate side, but it was enough to throw roadblocks, just slow them down the best you can.
Kind of like what Wallace does at Monocacy.
Yeah. But when Howard does arrive on the 20th, Sherman now has a 3-to-1 manpower advantage, 60,000 versus 20. And there's some casualties on both sides too, but that's pretty much what they had. And Sherman was quite surprised to see that Johnson was still on the field that morning. He figured he would vacate the dance floor because he knew that once he saw right-wing people there, he would be severely outnumbered. He was going to take off, but he's still there. Instead of leaving, Johnston is going to adjust his lines, and he's going to create a salient on both flanks. Salient's a 90-degree angle that gives you 270-degree battle range, attack range. So it's a dangerous position. But he does it setting up at a place called Mill Creek, which is basically on the bridge where their escape is going to be over the river. He has both of the flanks in the woods. So again, it's a strong position. If you're going to do a salient, this is the place to do it. Johnson would later say that he stayed primarily to get his wounded out and to bolster his men's morale. But also, he's begging for Sherman to attack him, right? Because he knew, Johnston had been dealing with Sherman along the entire Atlanta campaign.
Yeah, he knew what Sherman's key moves were, what kind of a fighter he was. He probably knew him better than most Confederate generals.
He knew all of his greatest hits. He could finish his sentences at this point. He knew that Sherman always liked to attack the left flank, and that when he attacked frontally, and he recklessly exposed himself, that he was in trouble. Think Kennesaw Mountain, for example. And he's begging him to get hit. Sherman's going to hit me right in the front, and we're going to slow him down again. But what happens? Sherman doesn't take the bait.
No.
Right? Sherman had no intention of renewing the battle on the 20th. All he wanted to do when he got there was feed his army and begin to move towards Goldsboro. That's the original plan, right? Go meet up with Schofield and go from there. So aside from the occasional skirmishing, which is primarily between the 14th Michigan and those 1st North Carolina Junior Reserve kids, there wasn't much of a battle on the 20th. The armies just stared at each other. That's all they did. The last division from Howard's wing to arrive at Bentonville was commanded by Major General Joseph Mower, who led the 1st Division of the 17th Corps under Francis Blair. Right? Mower was a solid New Englander from Woodstock, Vermont, and Sherman called him the boldest young officer we have. His men called him Fighting Joe. There's not much creativity in that one.
No, it's not like some of the other nicknames you hear.
Fighting Joe 2.0, they should have called him, right? But the thing about Mower, he was aggressive. You know, he's the guy you bet $5 he will go punch the bartender in the throat at the bar. But he does it. That's who he was. Everybody knows Joseph Mower in their life. That's who he is. When Mower arrives, he wanted to do something and not sit still. So he reaches out to Francis Blair, his boss, and says, quote, "I suppose, General, after I get into position, there'll be no objection to my making a little reconnaissance." And Blair responded, "None at all." So at dawn on the 21st of March, Mower, now in position, he took up Blair's his pre-approval to do some recon work. By recon work, Mower took that to mean open an all-out assault on Johnson's left flank with his entire 3 brigades of John Fuller, Milton Montgomery, and John Tilson. So he's told to kind of peek around and see what the deal is. He goes full Leroy Jenkins at this moment. He's going to go in there and just hit them. Now, Johnson is going to have to react pretty quickly to this because he was not expecting this. He's going to order General Hardee to put together a force basically on the fly. I mean, I got these Union guys hitting me here. I don't know who they are, and we got to figure this thing out. We're not ready for this. This attack is going to begin around 1 p.m. on the 21st, and the Rebs are going to do what they can to hold them back. Captain John Nielsen of the 25th Indiana, he wrote of it, "We advance under heavy shelling and heavy musketry from the enemy. Cap Wynn, where that is, fell dead from a musket ball, piercing his forehead just above his right eye. He knew not what hit him." So what does this say? It means the rebels are basically kind of ready for this a little bit. They're hitting with what they can. So at this point, Mower, his men are going to now begin to drive Johnson's small force back, and they're going to turn and they're going to GTFO. They're going to run like hell. They're actually going to run right past Johnson's headquarters. Picture looking out the window, but where are you guys all going, right? And this is just north of where the battle that we talked about earlier was. It was around then when Hardee had enough troops put together, he cobbles together a force to begin a counterattack against Mower. And he puts a mixture of cavalry and infantry. Basically, anyone who's around, he's going to grab and throw him into a pinch here. Hardee is going to personally lead the 8th Texas Cavalry, which is known as Terry's Texas Rangers. And they're going to be from Joseph Wheeler's corps, and he's going to lead them right into the teeth of Mower's division, right?
And part of the cavalry is Hardee's son, Willie, who is only 16 years old at the time, and he wants a chance to fight.
His son has been nagging his father to fight. He's been a staff officer, and he's like, "Dad, listen, this thing's almost over. You got to let me in this," right? Exactly. Think of like the movie Lincoln with his son, right? Kind of. And finally, just imagine. And finally, Hardee relents to this. "Oh, for God's sakes, fine." He tells Captain Kyle of the 8th Texas Cavalry, "Swear him into service in your company, and nothing else will satisfy him." So now Willie is part of this counterattack. And it's effective initially. It does drive Mower's men back, and it does stop that assault on the left flank, at least temporarily. While watching Mower's men retreat, Hardee is going to be laughing, and he's going to turn to an officer and said, "Well, that was nip and tuck, and for a while, I thought Tuck had it." That was a quote he had. And what happens a moment later?
Willie will be shot in the chest.
He's going to see Willie rolling up on a horse, slumped over, being held by another soldier. He had been shot in the chest, and Hardy had to stand by helplessly watching him get taken off the horse, put into an ambulance, and then taken off to a field hospital where he's going to die 2 days later.
And I have a story about that for the end.
Oh, okay.
So
Joseph E. Johnson, after seeing Mower's assault, he decides, you know what, the hell with this. We're going to give orders. We're going to get the hell out of here because there's too many men. We're going to get completely whacked. He's going to order a retreat on the night of the 21st. He'll march 10 miles north to Smithfield. Again, maybe they stopped at the Cracker Barrel. I would hope they would. Poor Joko. But Johnson's going to live to see another day. But this is going to be his last battle. When Sherman learned about Mower's unauthorized assaults, you can imagine. I don't know if he had pants on at this point, but if he did, if he was upset, he was. But he decided, for whatever reason, he's not going to pursue him. In his memoirs, Sherman says he regretted this action because he basically let Johnson get away. And he wrote, I think I made a mistake there and should rapidly have followed Mower's lead in the whole of the right wing, which would have brought on a general battle, but it could not have resulted otherwise and successfully to us by reason of our vastly superior numbers. So by the next day, Johnson and the Confederates are gone, and now he's moving to Goldsboro. That's how it is. I mean, it's likely, and this is read between the lines here, we get in trouble sometimes, Sherman probably thought there was enough bloodshed at this point, and he realized chasing them down at this point of the war, and this is pre-Appomattox now, okay? But he probably figured that was enough is enough, but we'll deal with these guys later. But again, his plan was to get to Goldsboro all along. He saw this battle as an unnecessary nuisance that went over the top. In the end, despite the Union only losing 1,500 men and the Confederates 2,600, the Battle of Bentonville remains a watershed moment in the war because it was really the Rebs' last bite at the apple. It really, really was. Sherman's plan was to meet Schofield in Goldsboro to resupply his army before meeting up with Grant in Virginia. Now, Sherman never made it that far. Now, again, he did travel to City Point to meet with Grant along with Lincoln.
There's that amazing painting where it looks like Sherman is clearly dominating the conversation.
Gideon Wells is staring off looking at the birds. We've seen that painting. But again, Grant likely, and this is speculation here, Sherman never made it to Petersburg. Grant likely wanted Lee's capture to belong to him and the Army of the Potomac, realistically. So their plan to merge the armies, it just never happened. And that's just speculation on my part. Johnson and Sherman again would meet on April 26th at Bennett Place in Durham Station, and Johnson's surrender, for all intents and purposes, is going to end the American Civil War. Now, at this point, this is post-Appomattox, post-fall of Richmond, post-Lincoln assassination. But again, what Bentonville was that last hurrah for the Confederates, and even though Joseph E. Johnson knew the outcome, realistically speaking, I don't think he had any real pretense that he was going to win this. But his goal was to delay Sherman's meetup with Schofield, and he did whatever he could to make that happen. And so, for the most part, that's how the battle's going to end. Yep. And I think it kind of gets the crappy end of the stick when you look.
It doesn't get talked about a lot when you're looking at battles at the end of the Civil War. Appomattox is obviously very, very, very important too, but I feel like Bentonville should be up there as well with battles that are looked at.
In North Carolina's in the crowd? All right, well, there isn't. That's okay. They would agree with this. There's an old saying, and this applies here to Gettysburg, that North Carolina did all the work, Virginia get all the credit. I mean, they both had almost exactly the same number of casualties, about 30,000 in their states in the war. So they lost a lot. And there's still friction between the two. And they were building the monuments here in Gettysburg. The North Carolina monument people wanted a bigger than the Virginia monument. And there's still a rivalry, if you think about it.
And the story I wanted to tell about the end of the battle is about William Hardy's son, Willie. So prior to the Civil War, Hardy and Howard were both at West Point. Howard was a math professor, and Hardy and him were friends. And Howard would go and help his son at night with math and teach him. He was kind of like, he was basically his math tutor. So Howard wrote in his memoirs that a few days after Willie had passed away, a Confederate officer wrote him a letter letting him know that Willie had died. And Howard will write his wife Elizabeth and let her know as well, because she had known the boy too. And Howard had children that were similar age, and I think the death really, really affected him. The Confederate officer that wrote him and let him know was another friend of his, S.D. Lee, was the one to write him and let him know that Willie had passed away. But you can tell writing the letter that he wrote his wife, as well as in his memoirs, that this was a death that really hit him. And he makes remarks of that because it was so close to the end of the war, and Willie was only 16 years old.
Yeah, it's tough. Just imagine that he carried that for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
Losing your son, really, just because to give him what he thought was going to be just a little fun action that was going to be the end of it.
It was Hardy's only son too.
It's sad. This is reenactor weekend here in Gettysburg and recruitment, I guess, and so we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about that. We, along with some of the people in this crowd here, participated in the reenactment last weekend at Bentonville, and it was done very, very well. Lots of people were there, so if you
amazing time.
So if you have a chance to do that, definitely check it out, because it was a unique experience in a lot of different ways. But again, it's fun going to do a reenactment as a Union guy on someone else's turf too. You definitely notice that.
Yeah, that was, and for me, well,
hazardous too.
And for you as well, it was really the first time we had been out kind of more in the field, I guess you could say. Last Saturday morning, 4 of us went out scouting, and we found ourselves in the woods watching, I guess it was the Confederate dress parade, right?
We had to spy, get the number of the battalions, count their flags, get a report back. It's fun. It's fun, but the people take it very seriously.
But so the story that I have from that is I was with our friend Tony. We were kind of back from where you and Ty were. And I just remember Tony saying, they're getting too close. They're getting too close. And you got really close, and Ty was telling you to back off. But the one thing I felt was this sense of anxiety. I was very, very anxious the whole time. And there was one point where some of the Confederate cavalry rode by on their horses, and we thought they were going to turn down the road. And my foot fell asleep, and I didn't know if I could move or not. But it was, it's not exactly the same, but it was great to be in that and experience that.
Well, if we had to retreat, it was Darren and Shelby first. Remember, don't forget.
I was like, I'm going to be the one to get captured, because I was breaking in my brogans at the time. They were new, and my feet were.
You're not going to be the fastest. Just don't be the slowest. That's the secret to running from a bear or Confederates either way.
And I had what was the gun I had? Was that a?
You had what did you have?
It was nearly as big as I was.
You had a Springfield.
Yeah, so I'm carrying this Springfield. It is so heavy. And when you're walking, I'm having to put it on either shoulder. Sometimes I carried it at my side, but it was a great experience. It was amazing sleeping out in the woods where it was 20th Corps, right? Where they had camped. Just really, really awesome. If you ever get the chance to reenact, it's part of that, I highly recommend it.
It's great because you can study history, you can go on the field, but unless you actually do it and kind of get in the weeds of it, it just adds a different perspective. You gain more of an appreciation for the men. There's no question about that. So if anybody has any questions about Bentonville, we're happy to do. We still got a couple minutes left. We wanted to finish right at 1:15, which we did. So has anybody been there, have any questions? We had to answer some. If not, that's totally cool too. So again, this is going to go on the rest of the day today. So there's some great presentations of a couple minutes to kill here. And then at 10 o'clock, there'll be another one. This is going to go all day. There's going to be some music later on here at GettysGear for the people listening. GettysGear, if you need any type of souvenirs, coffee is great. The best cigars in the world. No question about it. Come from here. Come check it out. Tomorrow, we'll be here at 11 a.m. doing trivia.
Yes, we will.
So we'll be doing that as
Civil War trivia.
Civil War trivia. So see how much.
Darren wrote the questions, so
it'll be fun.
It'll be like writing the guide exam.
Oh yeah, it's good. But again, we appreciate you guys coming out. Appreciate everybody listening to this. Again, we can't thank Carrie and GettysGear for this opportunity to do this. It's a great thing. So come by and support them, whether there's presentations or not. All right. So what's next for us?
We have to sit down at the old headquarters and come up with some episode ideas.
Yeah, we'll definitely do that. We'll definitely come up with some different ideas. Yeah, question.
In the Blue Book on Bentonville, the author says something like, for reasons only known to General Bragg, Hoke and McClaw's divisions did not join the assault. Mm-hmm. What's your opinion as to what went wrong?
So the question was, Robert Hoke, for the most part, didn't join the assault. And I think by reading some of the action reports for this, Hoke's job was really to guard the north side of the Goldsboro Road. And there's clearly some sort of miscommunication because, like I said before, Bragg attacked late, for example. I think just by reading it, and again, Johnson at this point wasn't on the field yet. I think Hoke and those North Carolinians, I think what they understood their orders to be was to guard the north side of the road so the North can't get past them. And I just think they never got the orders to attack. And then that's just my, again, opinion, not fact, but that seems to make sense with what actually happened.
Also, it's Bragg. Sorry, I had to. It's also Braxton Bragg.
Right, the gift that keeps on giving. You know.
Thank you.
Oh no, definitely. So again, we appreciate this and appreciate you listening. This episode will drop this weekend, so we'll do a live, I believe, on Sunday.
Yes, Sunday at 10 on our YouTube channel.
In the morning, so off we go. Any final words from you there, Fincheru?
Thank you for bringing it like you always do, and thank you to everybody who came out to watch this live recording of the podcast today.
Give yourself a round of applause for coming out at 9 o'clock in the morning, everybody. Thanks for coming out. Nice crowd here at Gettysburg. We'll talk to you all soon on the other side.
See y'all later.